My name is Tori. I'm a licensed therapist with a focus on eating disorders. And today we're going to cover eating disorders and other controlling habits, specifically obsessive compulsive disorder. And we're really going to look at this protective factor of eating disorders and OCD. So when people first learn that I'm a therapist and I'm an eating disorder therapist specifically, they always wonder, what got me into eating disorders? Because it's a field that there's not a whole lot of us there. It's a kind of specialized field not everyone wants to go into, but I felt really drawn, and it all started with pageants. So I remember competing in pageants, and backstage I would hear all these girls talk about different behaviors and things they did to prepare for the pageant. So if you're at all familiar with the pageant, there's different phases of competition, and one of those phases is the swimsuit portion. So it's where you put on a bikini and you walk in front of thousands, maybe hundreds, thousands of people in your swimsuit. And so women went to drastic lengths to prepare their bodies for that swimsuit competition. And so there was many behaviors that were very normal. They weren't stigmatized. People weren't secretive about them. They were very upfront about what they were doing to prepare for the swimsuit competition. And I'm going to go over them because they're toxic. They're not healthy at all. But in the pageant world, they were normalized. They were even called healthy. And one of those was the use of water pills. Now, a water pill sounds harmless. It's like, what is that, a pill filled with water? No. A water pill is another name for a diuretic. And a diuretic flushes your system. It's going to make you pee. And so these girls preparing for the swimsuit competition would not drink water days leading up to the pageant, and they would be taking these water pills. So they were extremely dehydrated. Girls backstage would complain about feeling dizzy. They were about to pass out. They were feeling sick. But it was normal. This was something people did. It was just a normal part of pageants, but I saw that and I thought, okay, this is not healthy. Another thing I saw was the use of laxatives. So we would have meals sponsored by different restaurants in the area, and they'd be bigger meals. And afterwards, you would know what all the girls were going to do. They were going to take a laxative, which makes you go to the bathroom, and they were attempting to rid their body of the food they just ate, but laxatives do not prevent the absorption of calories. It has no effect on fat content, fat absorption. So I saw that that's not healthy, but it was normal. Another thing I saw was excessive exercise. So girls would talk about their workout plans and how they would spend 2 hours a day just on an elliptical as their warm-up. I don't know how they did that because I would get extremely bored having to be on an elliptical for 2 hours. And they would work out multiple times a day for hours at a time. I saw that. I knew that is not healthy. That is not sustainable, but it was normal. Also, there was a lot of food restriction, and they called it diets. So I kid you not, many of the girls survived on only chicken, broccoli, and rice for the months leading up to the pageant. And as a result of this, there was a lot of food obsession, a lot of food preoccupation the week of the pageant because girls were planning their binges. You know, all the cookies, cake, pizza, ice cream, donuts that they were going to eat after the pageant because they had been deprived of those things months leading up to the competition. So I saw that and I'm like, that doesn't seem very healthy. Your body might look a certain way in a swimsuit, which might be a one-dimensional view of health, but the behaviors it takes to get there, those aren't healthy. Those are watered down, normalized versions of behavior seen in people with eating disorders. So this began my deep dive into eating disorders because I was really curious what happens when these eating disorder behaviors become more intense and severe and result in a diagnosable full-blown eating disorder. And when I began my research, what I quickly found was something so profound that I did not expect to find. And it is a hallmark feature of eating disorders that we have to understand before moving forward. And that is that eating disorders are very rarely ever about food or body image. Eating disorders are about control. Now I'm going to say that again because this is a key anchor for the rest of what we're going to learn today. Eating disorders are very rarely ever about food or body image. Eating disorders are about control. So there's this protective factor at play with eating disorders. And it's actually a pretty impressive example of how complex the brain is when it comes to its response to control. So what might happen is someone is experiencing this stress or chaos. They're feeling out of control in this part of their life. And the brain says, hey, you can't handle this. This is not safe for you. We need to think about something else. So what the brain does in its attempt to protect you from whatever the stress and chaos is that's going on, the brain hyperfixates on food, exercise, weight, body image, calories, in an attempt to achieve this sense of control, this sense of mastery in one part of your life, because in other parts you feel like a failure. In other parts you feel out of control. Eating disorders develop out of a place of someone feeling powerless and that the circumstances in their life are out of their control. So when the individual begins exerting control over their eating, their weighing behaviors, their body image, the brain perceives this as a success, and the brain sees it as a reminder of like, hey, don't worry, we're in control of something. We might not be in control of this situation over here, your parents' divorce, the sexual trauma, abuse, humiliation. We might not be in control of all that's going on over here, but don't you worry because we're getting control of our body and calories. And now here's where the brain gets really, really complex. It's actually quite fascinating. So the brain knows that if you begin fixating on food and body image, and if you begin restricting your food intake, your body is going to go into starvation mode. And get this, when your body is in starvation mode, you become even more preoccupied with food. You become obsessed with food. All you think about is food because your body is hardwired to focus on survival. And without food, the body won't survive. Food is necessary for survival. So other thought processes going on in your mind that aren't essential to the survival of your body will be pushed aside. So those things like the divorce your parents are going through, or your mind thinking about the sexual abuse that happened years ago, or those hateful comments you heard growing up, the brain won't focus on those things because it is focused on survival, and food is required for survival. So if that sounds a little confusing, I'll give you a pretty simple analogy I think many of us can relate to. So think of it this way. How many of you growing up did those hold your breath competitions when you were at the pool? So how it goes is everyone lines up against the wall, you get ready, you say 3, 2, 1. People plug their nose, go underwater, and you just see who can hold their breath the longest and stay underwater for the longest amount of time. So when you first go underwater, you're probably just thinking about random stuff, or you're trying to intentionally think about certain things to keep your mind off of the fact that you really need some oxygen, that you really want to go up for air, but more than that, you want to win this competition. And so you start trying to maybe count the tiles that you see or think about something else to take your mind off of the fact that you are needing air. But your brain's going to start freaking out a little bit like, hey, we need air. We really need air so that we can survive. We need to breathe. But then you keep trying to push those thoughts away of like, no, let me think about something else, so I'm not going to be thinking about breathing. But then it comes to the point that your brain is screaming at you. It's like, breathe, breathe, breathe. You have to come up for air. And then you come up for air. And why is it that your brain is sending such strong messages and that you can't push out those thoughts? It is because without air, the body will die. You will not survive. Your brain bombards you with messages about air so that you are motivated to seek air so that you won't die. The same is true when the body is deprived of food, because just like air, food is essential for survival. Because when the body is deprived of an essential element for survival, it will increase thoughts about that essential component to motivate you to do something about it. So in this case, with the underwater competition, it is motivating you to go up for air. So this is maybe why you hear people on a diet always talking about food. It's usually the food they tell themselves they can't have. And this is also, for example, why someone struggling with anorexia is hyper-focused on what they are eating, planning their meals, counting their calories, spending hours on a meal to make it last longer. The body is hardwired to fixate on elements required for survival, like food and like air with the underwater competition. So this is me on the 42nd season of Survivor. Yes, I know I had blonde hair there. It was fake. I have dark hair now. But for those of you who don't know, Survivor, it's a reality show where they take a bunch of strangers, they place them on a deserted island, and they make them survive and compete in challenges and strategize, vote each other off until there's only one person remaining who wins $1 million. Spoiler alert, that was not me. But there is this thing on Survivor. It's called the Survivor Diet. It's where you simply don't eat anything. That's the diet. You're literally on the island where you have to forage and hunt for food. And even if you forage and hunt for food, you don't always find food. So obviously people are going to lose weight. And during this Survivor Diet, aka starvation, I noticed that the people on my tribe, the people on the island with me, became obsessed with food. you would think that during our downtime, we'd talk about fun stuff or, make jokes or talk about family or strategy. No, people would sit around talking about food. They would daydream about all the things they were going to eat once they were off the island. And why is this? It's because their bodies were in starvation mode, so the body went into protective mode by hyperfixating on food to motivate us to look for food so that we could survive. So we'd be sitting around camp and our brains were sending us signals like food, food, food. We need food. Think about food. Talk about food. To motivate us to go find food, because without food, the body won't survive. But hey, don't just take my word for it. Research also supports the fact that when the body is deprived of food and in starvation mode, a person becomes obsessed and preoccupied with food. So the Minnesota starvation experiment was a hallmark study done in the 1940s that had a ton of implications on starvation, refeeding, and eating disorder treatment. Now what's interesting is that in the 1940s, this was a time of World War II. And so there was forced starvation, atrocities throughout Europe. And so America knew there's going to be a lot of soldiers and men at war who are going to be starved and come back to America after the war, and we're going to have to find a way to refeed them safely. So this study, this experiment, was really focused on figuring out how to refeed people and men after they were starved. But there's a dilemma here, because if you need to figure out how to refeed a starved person, first you have to starve a person. So this is why this study could not be replicated today, because it's somewhat unethical, because they did a starvation phase for these men. And so what happened was they took 36 young, healthy men, which is very important for you to know, that they didn't just take a random sample of the population. No, because they were looking at the effects of famine on soldiers at war. And so who were soldiers? It was young, healthy men. So they took that as their baseline, and they just monitored these men for the first part of the experiment. They just wanted to see what are their normal cognitions and cognitive functioning, what are their exercise habits like, their food intake, what are they thinking about, what is their behavior, any personality changes, their health. So they just wanted to get a baseline of what is normal functioning for these men. And then they went through a starvation period where they decreased the men's calories in half, and many of the men ended up losing 25% of their body weight. So this was a significant starvation period. And they monitored, what are we seeing during the starvation period? And then they took the men through the refeeding phase, where they were trying to figure out what's the best way to refeed these starved men. And once again, they were looking at what are the changes in behaviors, personality, cognitions. And what they found during the starvation phase was pretty profound. It was that starvation caused food obsession. Starvation caused food preoccupation. Starvation is simply what caused these men to become obsessed and preoccupied with food. They noted in the study that the men during the starvation phase, they would daydream about food, they would talk about food, they would watch movies, normal movies, and when food was present in the movies, they would comment on the frequency and the types of food. Their brain was hardwired to talk about food. They would hoard cookbooks. They would read recipes. Food became this essential aspect of these men's life. And keep in mind, that was not present in their normal functioning. So it's not that any of these men had eating disorders or anything of that sort before they were starved. So this study shows that starvation is simply what causes this food preoccupation. And so we see a very similar protective factor of the brain at play with obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, as many of you have probably heard it. So obsessive compulsive disorder is marked by three main features, and that's intrusive thoughts, obsessions, and compulsions. And we'll go a little bit more into each. So obsessions develop as a result of the intrusive thoughts. So intrusive thoughts are thoughts that just pop into your consciousness. They are often unwanted, disturbing, even distressing, that just intrude your mind with no warning. And when these intrusive thoughts continue, it can develop into an obsession. And an obsession is this intensely held belief or fear. Some common obsessions are fear of contamination, fear of losing control of yourself, like acting on thoughts of harming someone, stealing something, or becoming violent, fear of accidentally hurting someone, unwanted sexual obsessions, fear of forgetting or losing something important. So the obsession is the thought, it's the belief, it's the fear. And then what we see are compulsions. So compulsions are the behavioral responses to the obsessions. So think of it as obsessions are the thoughts, the belief, the fear, And then compulsions are the behavior, it's the response. And compulsions occur as this attempt to relieve the anxiety with these distressing, unwanted, obsessive thoughts. So obsessions are the thoughts, compulsions are the behaviors. And some common compulsions include checking behaviors. So that's like consistently checking, is the door locked? Let me go back and check, let me go back and check, let me go back and check. Or even with making sure the stove or different appliances are off. You can also see excessive cleaning, counting letters, words, or objects. Doing day-to-day activities repeatedly, like going up and down, up and down, up and down the stairs. Repeating specific phrases or sequences of words, either mentally or out loud. It could also be doing things in multiples, like turning the light switch on and off 7 times. And once again, the purpose of compulsions is to relieve the anxiety that comes from the obsessions. So it is your brain's way of trying to avoid the distressing, disturbing thoughts by going to some other behavioral response. And we see the same theme of avoidance in OCD. Psychologist Lynn Summerstein suggests that perhaps recurring or frequent intrusive thoughts are a sign that there is something difficult or something going wrong in a person's life. Perhaps they're struggling with relationship problems, stress at work, or frustration with parenting, and trying to keep it from bubbling over and taking over their life. However, instead of problems staying politely buried like we would like them to, it finds other ways to work its way up to the surface in the form of these intrusive thoughts. So what Lynn is saying is that these intrusive thoughts can be a sign of something underlying. There's actually something going on over here, which is distressing to the individual, and the individual is trying to shove it down, avoid it, not think about it, but it's bubbling up in another way. And that's with the obsessions, which then leads to the compulsions. And this sounds really similar to if there's something going on in someone's life that they feel out of control, they feel powerless, there's stress and chaos. They try to push it down, and the brain goes into this protective mode to think about something else, an eating disorder. So the important theme here is to realize that your brain is actually trying to protect you. It's saying, hey, this stress, this chaos that is happening in your life is too much for you to handle. It is not safe for you to think about, so I'm going to protect you by focusing on something else, which is food in the case of eating disorders. See, the problem though is that the brain's protective nature becomes so intense that it actually becomes a problem in itself. And it's become so powerful that we don't know how to switch it off. If you restrict food for too long, it can be fatal. Anorexia has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. And if you do those compulsive checking behaviors too much, it will interfere with your everyday life and you won't be able to get other things done. So if you realize the brain's protective nature has become so intense and it's interfering with other aspects of your life, the solution is not to give yourself a pep talk and try to tell yourself, you know what, I can do it. I can handle this on my own. No, because your brain knows that you can't and that it's not safe for you. So the solution is to develop deeper support, resources, tools, skills, and outlets so that you can process whatever it is going on over here. Now, statistically speaking, there may be some people listening to this video who are struggling with OCD or an eating disorder. That probably doesn't apply to everyone though, but I can guarantee that everyone is dealing with some form of stress or chaos in your life. So here are some practical steps, some practical tips for what you can try. And the first thing is just do a self-assessment. Like ask yourself, what is actually going on? Where am I feeling out of control? What is underneath all of this? What are the pains or the stressors in my life? And this also requires you to make space for that. So instead of trying to push it under the rug or shove it all down, because it will find a way to resurface, making space to allow yourself to process and think about what is really going on here. Another huge aspect is getting support. So whether that's therapy or getting involved in a church ministry, turning to friends and family, maybe it's learning new skills like reading books, watching YouTube videos, some way to gain support and resources so that you can deal with whatever it is going on. And also a big part is reassuring your body that it is okay and that you can handle this with help. See, your body is in protective mode because it thinks it's not safe for you to handle whatever it is over here. So reassure it that you are safe because you have the support and resources to help you. And one of the most important things is self-compassion. See, your brain knows that if there is no compassion, it isn't safe to process whatever is going on over here. If you're going to be cold or harsh to yourself, the brain knows that that's not a safe place or time for you to process. And see, compassion is the ability to show empathy and love and concern to someone who is going through a difficult time. So self-compassion is simply the ability to direct those same emotions within and accepting yourself, particularly in the face of failure. So I know that we covered a lot here, but one of the things I want you to really focus on and take away is this idea of tuning in to yourself. Like, what is actually going on? And asking yourself that when these behaviors that feel obsessive or you find yourself turning to certain things, ask yourself, what is actually going on? For example, like, are you actually wanting to binge? Or is it that you're really stressed out? Or maybe it's, are you truly wanting to exercise for 2 hours? Or is it that you feel really overwhelmed with academics and the stress of all the tests coming up? For you, it might be, is it that you truly want to track every single calorie that enters your body? Or is it that you feel powerless when it comes to controlling certain parts of your life? And so you're trying to hold on to the sense of control when it comes to your body. So tune in, create space, and have self-compassion.